You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, and yep, you found your way back to me. You're listening to another episode number 214 to be precise, of Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. I'm Mighty Blue, or Steve Adams, and we've got another excellent show today. First up, we've got a fellow member of the class of 2019. Weren't we lucky that we chose last year as our year to do the AT? You're going to meet somebody I met and had dinner with in Erwin, Tennessee. I was staying in Erwin and meeting up with a listener from the show, and this guy, James Brinkman, or Snickers, was with his buddy at that time, a guy called Todd Withrow, or Wolverine. We had a really good chat that night, and recently Todd reached out to me to suggest that I might like to have James on the show. When I tell you he's got quite a story of battling against the odds to even get to the trail, believe me, and make sure that you listen to what he's got to say. Another listener, Steve Cole, wrote to me about how much he's enjoyed the show over time and that my guests have inspired him to one day hike the AT. He needed a bit of a warm-up and went to Europe and hiked the Tour Mont Blanc. I've heard of that hike, but never spoken to anybody about it, so I asked him to come on the show and chat to you all about it. It sounds marvellous, and Steve will be on after James. Finally today, Grandma Gatewood's spectacular progress up the trail has led her to New Jersey, and her fame is spreading all the time. She's become a kind of celebrity, and reporters are scrambling to get the best story from her. She seems to take it all in a stride, though. Before we get on, there's nothing about the coronavirus today, apart from this, of course. There didn't seem anything new to report in terms that would affect hikers, so I thought I'd just acknowledge that it's still with us. We're all aching to get back on a trail somewhere. I'm just going to move on. So let's meet James Brinkman, or Snickers. Now, here's a guy who was suggested to me by one of his hiking buddies last year. His name is Snickers, or James Brinkman, and I met both James and his partner at the time, Todd Withrow, or Wolverine, last year in Erwin, Tennessee. In fact, we had dinner together, and it was Todd who suggested I reach out to you. Hi, James. How are you?
Doing good. How are you, Steve?
I'm good now. We're trying to get this conversation going. You've got quite a story to tell, and I want to come to it bit by bit. And I thought I'd start it with a little bit of background. Tell people how old you are, where you live, and what you now do for a living.
Sure. I'm 34 years old. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and I currently manage my own massage therapy private practice in South Asheville.
Now, you do not look like a massage therapist, or you didn't last year anyway. Although I'm not terribly sure what a massage therapist looks like, because I remember Neville from Woods Hole Hostel was the most powerful masseurs I've ever had massage me in my life. So, I'm sure there are different types of massage all the time. And it was really your dad who got you into the idea of doing the trail, wasn't it? How did that come about?
Absolutely. My father was an avid outdoorsman, member of the Special Forces, and so I was always a firm believer in being out in nature, physical fitness, knowing how to live alongside nature and all those things. And naturally, he gravitated towards things like the Appalachian Trail and being out in the wilderness. And so I grew up listening to him tell stories about going out hiking and telling stories about people who hike the Appalachian Trail. And, it always resonated with me, yeah.
Did he get to do it himself?
He did not. He was pretty much 3 months deployed, 3 months back consistently for about 15 years. So he just never had the time. Yeah.
Oh, that's a shame because, but it's lovely that you were able to do what he would have loved to have done, I guess, wouldn't he? I guess that was a thing. Was that actually on his bucket list and you decided to take up his bucket list?
He was the kind of person that would never, use the word like bucket list. He was very stoic. He would have laughed at me asking him if he even had a bucket list. And he also was very careful about not pushing his dreams onto me. And I really appreciated that growing up.
That is an important thing. That is a
absolutely,
really
yeah.
important parenting thing.
Yeah, I mean, he really allowed me to discover nature alongside him and fall in love with it myself. And he allowed me to do that, which I always appreciated.
So there you are. You're a massage therapist. You've got your own business. And you decided at the age of 33 to go out and hike the Appalachian Trail. There's nothing too remarkable about that, but your story really started back in 2003, didn't it? What were you doing back in 2003?
2003, graduated from high school. I was 17 years old, and I went straight into basic training the fall after, down at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and went through training in Little Creek, Virginia, and then ended up going
What were you training as? What were you training for?
I was a musician, actually. We played music and performed for the Army. But then after going to school for music, I went down to Fort Benning, Georgia for airborne school, which ultimately brought me to the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Wow. So I've got to tell you, that's a bit of a transition from being a musician, playing the trombone or whatever it was you played, and to jumping out of planes. But then,
absolutely.
So one day when you were about 19 at the time, I think it was.
Yeah.
You were doing what you normally do and training and so on and jumping out of a plane. What happened?
Well, I had several rough jumps while I was stationed at Fort Bragg at the 82nd. Pretty much every single jump, I walked away with some form of injury. And then it was about August. It was about my 13th jump on Sicily drop zone. And I noticed that I was falling really fast. I was falling faster than the rest of the people coming out of the bird. And looked up and my chute was kind of tangled up and ended up popping my reserve chute and coming in pretty hot. And the culmination of my past jumps and that jump ended up breaking several bones, especially along the left side of my body where the impact kind of spread. And then having to have 3 of my vertebrae fused together and just recovering for several years from all the injuries. Yeah.
Wow. Now, when we spoke about this before and I was taking notes, which I often do before I do an interview, you told me that your left side was pretty jacked up, which sounds like a very modest way of putting something that sounds so horrendous. But something you just said, in fact, I think you mentioned it the other day, and it didn't really register quite with me then, was that this was your was it your 13th jump, you say?
Yeah.
Oh, there's an irony. So it's your 13th jump. You said in combination with your other jumps. So you'd had some bad experiences before?
Oh, absolutely. So you do 5 jumps at airborne school to graduate. And those jumps were actually pretty nice. They set me up expecting that the rest of the jumps are going to be really smooth. Right. But what had happened was that the weather was so warm. It was in July in Georgia. The updrafts from the heat were keeping the landings nice and smooth and soft. Right. And it was, I was up in the air and I was having fun. And then I got to Fort Bragg and then it starts getting cooler and the humidity drops and it's just the airs can get a little thinner and you don't get those updrafts on night jumps. And you can't see the ground coming. And so all these kind of things factor into, every jump is, the number that was being thrown around when I was in the service was that each jump is the equivalent of being in a car accident at about roughly 16 miles an hour to about 24 miles an hour. And I've been in several of those myself and, it's never fun. The parachutes we were using were not great. They served their purpose and they worked, but
no, they didn't. Trust no. Listen, as a complete outsider who knows nothing about this crap, they did not serve the purpose. Yeah. If you were having bad jumps, they did not serve the purpose.
There was about an injury every jump. There was, on average, somebody was getting carted off to the hospital with a sprained ankle or a concussion, or heaven forbid, you pass out or hit your head too hard and then your parachute gets picked up by the wind and you get dragged on the drop zone, or, the rare occurrence of landing in trees. It's good stuff.
Oh my god! Oh my gosh! That's the sort of thing you expect in World War II movies. People all landing in trees and they're just hanging there and they're finished. Oh my gosh! I'm kind of shocked. I've got to tell you, I really am. And I'm going to go on to that. What happened next? But as an aside, you hadn't been deployed at that time. You were a young lad. You're 19 years old. Tell people what happened 2 weeks after you.
Oh my goodness! Yeah. So as I'm medically, processing out of the military, I ended up taking an honorable discharge to get out so that I could be taken care of as a civilian. And anybody who's been in the military will understand that it's you're probably better off being taken care of as a civilian than in the military, especially during that time frame. But as I'm getting out of the military, my unit gets orders for Iraq, and they are out processing and doing all of their range qualifications, their combat training and preparing and all that stuff as I'm out processing in the military. And it was a very interesting experience to a lot of almost guilt. Yeah, I felt guilty, and it was difficult to see them prepare because my brother had just come back from a 16 to 18 month deployment. I can't remember how long it was. And it just, it was really tough. It was really tough. Yeah.
Well, look, listen, the good thing is for listeners, by the way, there is obviously a happy ending here coming up. So basically, you're 19 years old. You're basically crippled at this stage. Tell us about rehab. What was that like?
Well, starting out, they had, there was a process. They had to start with injections, cortisone, steroids, all these kind of things into my lower back, especially. Then there was just the bones that needed to be kind of healed. My ribs were really jacked up. My shoulder was jacked up. Just the entire left side was just not doing great. I had to
jacked up.
It's the delicate word I like to use to describe. And then I was going to the ER roughly once a week just to get emergency pain intervention in my lower back. And then that transitioned to physical therapy. Once it started to calm down, and physical therapy ended up inflaming my issues with my lower back. I think there was some underlying musculature issues that I understand a lot more now, being a massage therapist, than I did then.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sick of it.
And then that transition from physical therapy to talking to neurosurgeons, and I ended up talking to roughly 6 to 7 neurosurgeons before I finally was sent to one that I thought was going to do the right procedure for me. And that was a Dr. Voyatzis it was a Georgetown in DC. I'm so grateful for him because he did a pretty experimental procedure at the time on me called XLIF, XLIF. And it's a modern spinal fusion. And it was awesome. It was so amazing. It allowed me to make a pretty much complete recovery. Yeah.
So what was the time frame from, so when did you start feeling physically okay?
Oh my goodness. So I got out in 2006. My surgeries were around between like 2007 and 2010. Spinal surgery was around, I think it was around 2009.
Wow.
And so it took me roughly 7-8 years after the spinal surgery. So 10 years roughly after the accident for me to really feel physically solid. And I mean, partially that is because I went through such a deep, dark time going through all this that it was really difficult for me to find the motivation to do the things I needed to do. But yeah, about
yeah, we're going to come to that actually in a second. Actually, in fact, right now, you got to experience the VA and this drug Percocet, which I don't really know. I've heard of it, but I don't know what it does. But I know it's not great, is it? What was that like? What was the experience of dealing with the VA like, and the drugs? What was that?
Well,
like?
I'll tell you that dealing with the VA was difficult. And on the side, when I was going in for my disability paperwork on my out processing, they kept telling me that pain wasn't a disability. And so that was really disheartening to deal with that, to have a lot of pain and then them basically tell me, well, sorry, pain isn't a disability. This isn't something that we cover, all that good stuff. It was not fun. And anybody who's dealing with that, I highly recommend they contact the DVA, the Disabled Veterans Association. They are pro bono lawyers that fight for vets that are trying to get the compensation they deserve. But then also the VA and also all medical professionals that I dealt with at that point in time. They were just handing me bottles of Percocets whenever I wanted. I remember at one point a doctor wanted to give me, I think it was 80. And I told him, I was just like, I do not need 80. Like, please don't give me that. Like, it was like holding a hand grenade and realizing like, oh my God, like this could kill me, and I, at that point in time,
Did you ever want to die?
Did I ever want to die? I fully embraced the fact that at that point in time in my life, I was what I've been told is considered passively suicidal, where I was not trying to end my life purposely or intentionally, but at the same time, I was doing things that were obviously very unhealthy and very destructive. And I really didn't care.
80 tablets might have done it, mightn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it was absolutely. I mean, at one point, well, basically after a few years of being just handed painkillers and needing them, I developed a really extreme tolerance to them. The prescribed doses were doing absolutely nothing for me. And the pain level was so extreme at points, and especially during the breakthrough pain, that I had to take it if I wanted to even function. And those factors led me to develop an addiction, a dependency to it. And I did move to abusing it, and it was so easy to do. It was just absolutely easy to do. And it was very fluid. Just one day you're taking it to just simply take care of this terrible pain. And the next day you're like, oh my goodness, what is this terrible feeling? Why do I feel like I have to take this if I want to feel even relatively normal? And they just kept giving them to me, and I felt ashamed, and I didn't want to tell them to stop giving them to me. So it was really hard.
And you felt ashamed. That's terrible that you should feel that way, but I can kind of understand that. Yeah. And so you're having a tough time. And how did you actually get out of that? Because that's a mindset you have to overcome yourself, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I vividly remember the day where I just mentally checked out. And I imagined myself at a crossroads, and I realized that go down the way that I've been going, that I was going to die, and that all the things that I'd ever wanted to do, just wasn't going to happen, and that I was going to just be a terrible burden on the people around me. And just, it wasn't the life that I wanted to live. And in the other way, it was, get off my ass, take care of this, and do the things that I want to do, and live the life that I want to live. And it was a very obvious and clear choice. The medication was destroying me.
Sure.
Yeah. And so it was a very obvious choice. And I know that there's a lot of people out there going through that and have gone through that. And it's not an obvious choice to them. But for me in that moment, it was a very clear choice.
People do need to seem to have their, I mean, I have a son with addiction issues as well. And I know you have to hit the bottom,
Absolutely.
don't you, at some stage? And you obviously hit the bottom. So, but you made a comeback. You obviously kicked that. And I'm a bit confused in my notes here. I think you said I believe you saw your father through the end of his life.
Absolutely.
Didn't you?
About roughly 3 years after I had kicked painkillers, completely gone clean.
Sure. Right.
I was working as an audio engineer, sound design, producing over in studios in California, and going to school for electrical engineering at Sacramento State, and in Yuba City campus. And I got word that my father was terminally ill, and that he had roughly 3 to 6 months to live. So I dropped out of school, dropped everything, quit my jobs, moved back to Maryland to take care of him for what I expected to be 3 to 6 months. And ultimately he ended up living for a year and a half more. And out of that year and a half, I spent it was like 8 to 12 months of it with him, helping take care of him and watching him. He experienced a liver failure and peripheral neuropathy pretty much at the same time. So he lost his ability to walk, talk, speak, take care of himself. And seeing this larger than life person, degrade that way, it was very difficult. And it makes
you realize how important it is to use your time when you can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I walked away from that experience realizing that, no matter how you feel about what happens after you pass, this is your one shot right now to live your life, and that I had to do it.
Yeah. And you decided you would hit the trail.
Absolutely.
Last year. Now, with your record and your physical, not limitations, but the physicality of what had happened to you, what did your family and friends think of your decision? Do they think you could do it? Do they think it was smart? Or how did you take it?
Everybody was very supportive. I think I was the person that was most realistic when it came to the expectations of what my body could handle. And what's interesting is that everybody was supportive before, but after I finished the trail, I did get a few comments of, "Oh my goodness, I thought you wouldn't make it out of North Carolina," or that, because the way I was setting up the beginning of the trail was that I was coming back to Asheville about 30% of the time to run some business. And so it was...
Yeah, I'm going to come to that in a minute. Actually, that's going to be interesting as well. Now, I'm going to come to that in a minute, but I want to ask you really, because your friends and your family knew what had happened to you in your past, knew the difficulties you had physically. And so how were you able to handle the physicality of the trail? Because I always talk about how difficult it is mentally, but I'd imagine you had a double whammy, because the mentality of it is still important for anybody doing this trip, but the physicality must really have been testing for you as well, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I think the mental side of it was the easier part, because mental side of it being easier for me made the physical side easier also, because I mentally prepared myself for having to deal with the physical side of it. And the way I handled that was basically, I started on February 4th, and living within 3.5 hours of the trail all the way up to basically Damascus, I would hop back to Asheville every couple of days to take a few days off.
You took days off?
Body.
That is so cool.
I actually took days off. Yeah,
I never knew anybody who took days off like that. That's amazing.
It was a really different way of doing it. And I actually want to do the trail again, just to simply do it in a more traditional way. Now that I know my body better within the context of a through hike, I want to go back and try it in a more traditional way, because I do feel that I missed out on a lot of the social aspects of the trail.
I'm sure you did.
I was alone most of the trail. Yeah.
Yeah. And that, I don't think that's, and there's still several people out on the trail now, and I'm sure they're missing so much of the great bits of the trail. In the evening, you and I had dinner. One of our listeners drove, an hour or so to come and buy us dinner, didn't he? And he paid for dinner for us. It was just so awesome. And so you missed some of that, but I'm glad you experienced that. But you also got to know Cushy Life and Trigger, my two main hiking partners.
Yeah.
How did that come back? Because I think you met them before me, didn't you?
Yeah, actually through Wolverine. Yeah, Wolverine and I hiked through a large section of the Smokies, basically the last half of it together. I rolled out after the Smokies to go back home, take care of some business, and he went forward. And I ended up catching up with him around Erwin, Tennessee. And at the time, Cushy and Trigger were hiking with him, and I met them, and really awesome people, really, really awesome people.
Yeah, and you're right. You did miss some of that thing, because you're actually on the trail from, say, early February to early October, so 10 months out there. And I remember thinking, when you told me that when we were first talking about it, you're even slower than me. But then this thing about taking several days, only hiking about 4 days a week. What was that like? Was it? I would imagine it was tough to go back home, sleep in your own bed for 2 days, then come back again. Or did you find that actually quite good for you?
I loved it.
Oh, really?
It was, besides the fact that I wasn't around the other thru hikers very often, I actually loved it. Spending that time, like 4-day stretch of about 50 miles, and then getting picked up, going home, and getting a massage, because being a massage therapist, I have several other therapists in town that I do exchanges with, and I have a hot tub for my clients to use that I of course use. And so going from the ice storms of North Georgia and North Carolina during February and March to going home, and also being able to reset my gear. I was able to come out with micro spikes a few times when it was actually going to be icy, and then just drop it back off at home, and resupplying was easier. I was able to buy the food and bring back the food that I wanted to eat. And so I felt like it staved off a lot of the negative mental sides of the trail too. It kept me fresher, and I wanted to be out there, so it was very easy to get back out there.
And what was it like running your business at that time? Did you find that you could, I don't know how much you have to concentrate on things like that, because it's not just the massage, it's the running the business side of things as well, isn't it? Were you able to switch off, literally switch between two mentalities?
That's a really good question. I don't really think I had to switch between mentalities because I handle my practice all myself. I handle all my marketing. I do all my contact with my clients myself. I handle everything myself. And so I naturally had to slow down at the pace of what I was doing. But at that point in time, I was only really working with clients that needed the work. I do a lot of structural work, myofascial work, people trying to dodge surgeries and with injuries and active lifestyles. And so the clients I was working with at that point were ones that really needed it. And a lot of the other ones I had referred out to several other therapists in the area that I highly recommend. So I didn't really have to switch too much. But at the same time, I think that being on the through hike allowed me to operate more smoothly. It made me more grounded. When I would go into doing the sessions, there was enough time in between where I had been out in nature, where I'd reached a mindset that really allowed me to deep dive in the sessions and to really get into an awesome headspace. So it was really cool.
And you can't do that all the way up the trail, obviously, because you're limited in how far you can go back. So how far up the trail did you do that? And when did you come back to the trail for the last time, as it were?
Well, the last time I went back to the trail from Asheville was actually at, I believe it was Angel's Rest Hostel.
In Parisburg.
Parisburg. And that was because I ended up actually getting a tick bacteria. And luckily it wasn't Lyme's, and luckily it wasn't the one that made you allergic to beef or whatever. But I did have to do 2 weeks of doxy, and I have really nasty sun exposure issues with doxy. I burn super fast.
Wow.
So that was the last time I went back to Asheville and then went back to the trail. But the last time I would have to say that I purposely went back to handle business was around April 1st at Damascus.
Oh, right. Yep. So you went back, and then eventually there was a time when you had to then commit yourself full-time back to the trail. Did you notice a difference in the rhythm of your hike? We talk about the rhythm of your hike a lot. Well, I talk about it a lot on the show. You get into this rhythm of stuff. Did you find that once you went back and knew you weren't going back for business, did you find your hike changed?
Absolutely. Yeah, up until that point, I really didn't try to develop very close relations with too many people unless they seemed really interesting, like people like Cushy or Trigger, Wolverine. You've been following your podcast and all those kind of things. Y'all are pretty much the only ones from the entire southern section that I still have had any contact with afterwards, because it was actually very disappointing. I started the trail and I was hiking with a few really interesting people, and I wanted to stay in contact with them. And then I just realized that it was pointless, that they were going to be hundreds of miles ahead of me and finished months ahead of me. And so I was a very solitary experience. And then once I started going on trail full time, I really started being more social and talking with more people and trying to develop a tramily or just relationships in general on trail.
And you actually hiked with a couple of young women, didn't you? Or a couple of women?
Yeah, throughout Southern Virginia, I was hiking with a really awesome ex-Marine officer named Not Dead Yet. Great name. And then
you could have had that one as well.
Oh God, yeah. Well, when the drama happened around Mother's Day on trail, she actually had to drop the name for a little while because it was just kind of like a little cringy.
Yes.
But then it came back. People calmed down a little bit. But then the other woman, Indian Summer, a really awesome lady, lives out in Tennessee. I actually still have some of her gear. I need to mail back to her. She had me bring stuff back to Asheville for her. But yeah, I was hiked with them, then hiked with a really awesome crew of about, a bubble of people, around 30 people through Shenandoah, while everybody else was aqua blazing.
And that's interesting. I like that. You mentioned that, and we don't talk about that much on the trail. There is a bubble of people that you're not necessarily hiking with some people, are you? You're hiking around people a lot, aren't you? And you see some for 2 nights shelters, and sometimes you don't see them for a week, then you might see them again for a couple of more nights. It's funny how that bubble kind of literally moves up and down the trail, and you're part of it, and then you're not part of it, and it gets ahead of you, then it gets behind you, and all those sort of things. Yeah. Did you enjoy that part of it then more because you were then more social?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I can't remember his name, but one of the hikers that I became, pretty decent friends with at that point in time around Shenandoah asked me if I was a narc because I just randomly appeared on the trail. And it was right after the drama. And he's just like, wait, are you a cop? And I'm just like, no, like, no.
No,
But yeah,
that,
it was
that is deeply
interesting.
undercover
Yeah.
if you're a cop, yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Yeah. He was a little paranoid.
And I seem to remember that you, and I'm not sure we actually mentioned this the other day, but I think Wolverine mentioned it. Oh no, maybe you did mention it the other day. You actually did some massage for service for in exchange for certain things up the trail, didn't you?
Oh, absolutely. I am a firm believer in a bartering economy
Quite
and a
right.
gifting economy. It's especially when you're a skill based worker.
Of course.
And so I'm licensed to operate officially and insured to operate in North Carolina, but all up and down the trail, I was making friendly barters with people where I'd be like, oh, you have this food that I want and you have, your feet are killing you, go wash your feet in the stream and, I'll work on your feet a little bit. Or like Cushy, she had really bad shin splints. And so we were sitting in Tennessee in Erwin and, my flat rate was basically $1 a minute. And I would take PayPal, Venmo, cash, or bartering. And it was great. I loved it. It really allowed me to help people be more comfortable on the hike. I was, developing these relationships with people that allowed me to educate them on how to have better self-care, which blew my mind. Self-care on the trail was just borderline non-existent. And so I was, teaching people about that, teaching people how to, use logs to roll out their shins, and just, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
I'm sure it was actually, yeah. So given your that previous 10, 12 years and the troubles you'd had physically and I guess mentally as well, obviously, what impact did the hike have on both your mental and your physical well-being? Was it beneficial in every way?
Every way. Every possible way. I made the intention of going on the Appalachian Trail and teaching it and treating it as a 2,192 mile walking meditation. And with the understanding that there were going to be moments and days and even weeks where I was going to lose that focus, but as soon as I would realize I was losing that focus, I'd bring myself back to the present moment, whether that was sitting at dinner with friends or walking alone through the woods or whatever, setting up my tent. I would try to be mindful of the moment and stay in the moment and intercept negative thoughts, because even the most healthy, confident person, I feel, has negative thoughts at times. And I would be actively and consciously aware of them and try to eliminate them, or at least work with them and observe them and process them. And so for 6 months, pretty much, that I was in the woods, that's what I was focusing on. And so my mind after the trail was just absolutely clear. I've restarted my meditation practice over the past few months because I took a break after the trail, and I started feeling that cloudiness reappear in my thoughts. And then physically, since I took it nice and slow at the beginning and allowed my body to really ease into it.
Don't you think, hang on, just interrupt you a second. Don't you think that is one of the most, it's certainly the thing I always think is the most important thing to tell people? Take it easy to start, ease yourself into it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, there was so many people trying to rush and so many people getting hurt. And the fact that, I even with me taking it easy, I remember I did a 14-mile day, but the day before Blood Mountain, so that I could just hop over Blood Mountain and get into Neal Gap. And that was even a little too much for me. And I'm hiking in the mountains all the time out here. So it's crucial that people take it easy. Really don't rush yourself.
And did your body build up a sufficient strength? Obviously, your back would be an issue because it's fused and stuff like that. Did it build up sufficient strength to take on the rigors of New Hampshire and Maine? Because as you know, that was a tough darn finish, wasn't it?
Oh my goodness. I was going through the whites while a hurricane was coming
Oh
up the
my
coast.
gosh.
Yeah. And
Oh
so
my
like the
gosh.
hurricane actually didn't make landfall, but all the outer whips of the
I bet.
the storm were just buffeting themselves against the whites, and it was just brutal. And so I don't know really if I could have done anything to prepare myself for that. There were plenty of moments in the whites where I was just thinking to myself, this is dumb. I was like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
I look back and I'm like, I'm so happy I did it, and it was totally worth it. But in the moment, when you're experiencing 60-mile-an-hour winds and sideways rain and hail, and
Yes.
it's just ridiculous. Yeah.
But it's kind of awesome at the same time, though, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You get a real buzz out of it. The oxygen you're taking into your lungs as well.
Oh my goodness.
I got a tremendous. I mean, I went up several days on some of in the Bigelows and stuff. Trigger and I with the wind whipping around us. It was awesome, but kind of half frightening, but frightening in a wonderful way, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I would not trade those memories for the world, because those are the moments where you truly feel alive.
Sure, damn right. And so you got to the top of Katahdin, and did that satisfy you in a kind of "I told you so" way after your injury, or were you? What was your feeling when you got there?
I summited October 8th, and there was a couple of nasty parts going up the last third. Well, not the last third, like the middle third, where you're kind of going up those weird boulder. You know what I'm talking about. But anyways, there were some boulders that were iced over, and we had to create like human chains to get people over them. And by the end of it, I was just so tired and so exhausted that I just wanted a hot toddy. That's what I remember thinking. I remember getting up there and being like, I need a hot toddy right now. I need some like whiskey in a hot glass, something. And I mean, I remember being surprised that I wasn't more emotional. And I think that it was because I had my major, I can do this, I told you so moment kind of around Connecticut. I had this moment of satisfaction of like, okay, I didn't think I was even going to make it this far.
Sure.
By far. That was just like, if I am satisfied, and I
But
wasn't.
I bet you still had to get there, didn't you? Yeah, so I bet you still had to get
happy until I was done. But I knew at that moment, I was like, if I get hurt from this point on, I know that I did amazing things, and I will be so proud of myself and so happy. Yeah. And you know what? It didn't happen, and I ended up, taking it one step at a time, and it was amazing. Yeah,
only way to do it, man. Only way to do it.
Oof, yeah.
Now, you overcame an addiction to painkillers, and sadly, many people don't, obviously.
Yeah.
Is there anything you could share that, I mean, I don't know, I didn't prepare you for this at all, but you could share with people who have become addicted to painkillers or how to handle them, what they need to look at? Because I've not been through it myself, so I've got no idea at all, but you have. So is there something that clicks in your mind, you think this is what you might want to consider?
I will say that everybody's experience with addiction is a very personal one.
I'm sure.
So I will say it's very difficult to kind of just give a general thing that's going to be really profound. But what I will say, that the thing that comes immediately to mind is make sure that you're educating yourself on addiction, and make sure the people that are around you are educating themselves on addiction. Because one of the things that I see so often is that people that are surrounding the person who's dealing with addiction, they don't know how to help them. And so therefore, without that outside help and that outside support, it's very difficult for somebody who's at the eye of the storm of the addiction to really help themselves. So, for people who are around other people who are dealing with addiction, educate yourself on how to properly help them and how to actually be there for them. And then people who are going through addiction, make sure you're surrounding yourself with people who are willing to educate themselves and be there for you, and cut the people out of your life that are not, and let them know that it's something that you have to do to get healthy. And that's what's most important.
Are you sufficiently, I don't use the word coherent in a pejorative way, but are you thinking sufficiently clearly to be able to make those decisions, do you think?
I know that most of the time through the worst stages of my addiction, I was not coherent or aware enough to really make those decisions.
Right.
And it took a moment of clarity.
Right.
The pain that my body was experiencing because of the abuse of opiates gave me a window of clarity and made me understand what I was doing through that fog of the addiction of just, oh my goodness, this is where I am at in my life. I need to do something about it. And outside of those moments of clarity, it is very, very difficult to be able to come to terms with what you are doing to yourself. And yeah, it's extremely difficult. And that's why it's so important to surround yourself with people who are actually trying to be there for you and are not enabling you. Yeah.
Sure. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, look, you did it, which is freaking amazing as far as I'm concerned, man. So I'm really, really proud of you. I'm proud to have met you. I'm really pleased that you did it. And I know you had future plans. You planned, in fact, to do the PCT this year. That would have been tough to nip home to Asheville to handle your business, wouldn't it? Were you going to do the whole thing, I presume, in one go?
Absolutely. Yeah, this was, I originally was gearing up for the PCT before the AT because I was living out in Sacramento.
Of course, yeah.
And then I moved to Asheville and I wanted to do the PCT as a warm up to the AT because of how my body was, the physical issues that I was going to deal with. But the PCT this time around, the game plan was to start April 3rd, just a couple of days ago.
Yes.
And I was supposed to be rolling out from Scout and Frodo's that morning, enjoying their company. It was the last year that they were going to be doing the hostel down in San Diego. So I'm really bummed I missed that. And then, I was planning on doing the entire thing. I was ready to go. And honestly, being prepared for the through hike has made my life a lot easier throughout this whole quarantine experience. It's been interesting. Yeah.
Yes, I would think. Well, look, congratulations on doing the AT. I'm incredibly impressed, but now I know what your story is, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. And if you do go and do the PCT next year or the year after, whatever, and we're still doing the show, please let me know and we'll chat then.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me.
Okay, buddy. Well, take it easy, all right?
All right. Bye.
Bye. What a story, eh? I met many military people on the trail, and they all seem to cope with what has happened to them with incredible fortitude and resilience. I don't think I could have done that. James was crippled at 19 and addicted to painkillers or opiates in his early to mid-20s. Yet he worked out his own way through it and came to the trail to complete an amazing recovery. Fantastic stuff. And it was an honour to be able to speak with him about it. Now, while everybody wants to get hiking, let's hear from Steve Cole, who's planning an AT hike, but who wanted to share his experience on the famous Tour Mont Blanc in Europe. Here's Steve. I'd like to introduce you to a listener, a guy called Steve Cole, who is otherwise known as Sweat Bucket. He wrote in and told me about hiking the Tour Mont Blanc in Europe. So I invited him to come on the show and chat about it. Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me, Mighty Blue. Pleasure to speak with you.
Good to hear from you. You're Sweat Bucket. Why are you Sweat Bucket?
Well, my first ever section hike on the Appalachian Trail, it was a guided group a couple of years ago. And all of the people I was with, they've said they've never seen anybody sweat like that before.
Gosh.
When I led them down the trail with a trail of sweat.
Oh, nice. How pleasant. So tell us about what the Tour Mont Blanc actually is. I mean, I looked it up on Wikipedia and it's really interesting. It looks beautiful as well. Tell us, how long it is, how many climbs and where it goes.
It is. It begins in Chamonix, France, and goes from France into Italy and then into Switzerland and then back into France. It's 177 kilometers or about 110 miles.
Wow. That's quite a ways then. And there's a lot of up and down there because I remember I skied in Chamonix years ago and you can ski into Italy down a thing called the Wall. I don't know whether you know that. And you basically have to throw yourself off the edge about a 20-foot sort of into the air and then start skiing down, which was the sort of crazy thing I used to do in those days, but I don't do now, I tell you. So you started at Chamonix. So is that one of the traditional places to start, or is it a beginning to end hike, or is it a circle?
It's a loop. It's a loop around Mont Blanc, which is the highest peak in that part of Europe.
Sure.
And so it goes through the mountains around Mont Blanc, and it's a continuous circle. So Mont Blanc is pretty much always on your left if you go around counterclockwise, and it is spectacularly beautiful.
And is that the way most people go? Because I saw that most people go counterclockwise. And if they do, why would that be? Why would they necessarily go that way?
It does. It's about 80% of the people go that direction. It's the traditional. I guess it's not too different than how most people go south to north on the Appalachian Trail. It's just, I think the views are set up better that way.
Right.
Some of the climbs are set up a little bit differently to go that direction. But certainly, some people have done it both ways and some people go clockwise as well. But I went the more traditional route since it was my first time.
Yeah, well, we talk about, obviously, because you listen to the show, we talk about the AT quite a bit, and there's a lot of ascent and descent there. I suspect where you were hiking, there's quite a bit of that there as well, isn't there?
There is. When I first started listening to your show, it's because I learned about the Appalachian Trail, was intrigued by it, and started listening to your show,
sure.
And decided that I wanted to do it one day. You inspired me to do it. But before I did that, I said, well, I first better tackle something a little smaller to make sure I like it. And then so I decided to do the Mont Blanc because we were going to Europe anyways. And so, but before I did that, I said, let me learn something about what I'm doing. So that's when I signed up for about a 5-day hike along the Appalachian Trail near Asheville, North Carolina.
Right. And how different did you find it? Because hiking in Europe is a whole different ballgame, isn't it?
It is. It's what they call hut to hut. Or we stayed in refugios. So we stayed in basically hostels, whereas on the Appalachian Trail, we were tenting, and as you know.
Yeah. Can you camp on the trail, or is it not permissible, or are there campsites?
There are campsites, so you can camp on it. Most people don't because it's kind of frowned upon. They only want you to hike, or they only want you to set up your camp at dusk, and by dawn, they want you kind of out of there.
Right.
And there are a few other legitimate campsites you can stay at, but the overwhelming majority of people stay in the hostels where you can get a shower and a hot meal, and they tend to like that. But there were people tenting all along it as well.
So it's a pretty cozy trail. So could you literally camp every night if you chose to? In other words, you could do it quite cheaply, I presume, in that way, couldn't you?
You could. You may be forced to go longer in a day than you otherwise might, to get to a campsite, but you could certainly do it that way.
And what sort of style of walk is it? Do you plan it to get to a town or a village every night, or do you pass through towns and villages all the time?
Depending on when you go, and the season is short because of the snow.
Yeah,
I went in July, and so I needed to have my reservations made because the refugios do tend to fill up.
Wow! So
I had booked it actually with a tour company. I went independent, but I had pre-booked and prepaid for all of my stays at the hostels. And so I was on a schedule. I needed to get to the next refugio where my reservation was, or else I'd be, sleeping outside without a tent.
That must be so difficult, to plan it in that way. Yeah, I know that everybody plans when they do the AT, they do a spreadsheet and they realize within about 3 hours on the trail that that's all going to go out the window straight away. But you literally had to make sure, step back a sec. So 110 miles, how long did it take you to do?
10 days. One of the days was a Nero kind of. I only did about 2 miles one day, and the other 9 days was really the other 108 miles, if you will.
But in that way, you'd had to plan every single day where you were going to be that night. So you took a Nero because you kind of had to.
Well, that was just the way that the guide company that I went through has suggested that they do it. Because the woman who set it up for me has done it about 20 times, 30 times on her own. And so she knows all the right places to stay, and she knew about how far you want to go each day. And so it was helpful to do it that way.
Was it expensive?
Yeah, it was not inexpensive because the tour company was, obviously making money on it as well. But I found it to be worthwhile. You could do it less and try to book it on your own, but you're dealing with language issues and currency issues, things like that. If you do it on your own.
You said it was quite busy because you went at in the season. How many people would you see? Would you see loads of people all the time?
No, you'd kind of leapfrog the same people. I imagine it'd be like on the Appalachian Trail. You'd leapfrog people were staying at different places. So some days you'd see the same people, other days different people. Then you'd reconnect and so forth. But there were times where I'd go 3-4 hours without seeing another person.
Right.
And then there were times when I might have 30 or 40 people in my sight, either in front of me or behind me.
Yeah, and apparently much the same as skiing. When you ski off piste, you can take some alternate routes, and they call them, I think, the variantes or variant.
That's correct.
Did you take any alternates or not?
I did. I took most of the harder variants because they also tend to be the most scenic.
I bet. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me about that then. So you've got a prescribed route, which is 170 odd kilometers or 110 miles.
Mm-hmm.
And the variants, do they just take you up to a mountain, then down again to the same spot, or do they just literally take you a different route?
They literally take you a slightly different route. So it ends up being about the same number of miles. It just it might be more of a climb,
right,
than a little bit flatter route. Not that there's anything flat out there. It was quite difficult.
I say, when you've skied in a place, you know it ain't that flat. I mean, really. I've skied all day and had Mont Blanc around, so I must have been somewhere near it. But when I lived in Europe, when I used to in England rather, and I used to go skiing in Europe, I was never a hiker, so I never knew I was ever going to hike. I'd love to do a hike like this. You must have had some amazing photos, didn't you?
It was interesting that the photos I took were spectacular, but even, of course, with a digital camera, when I'd look at them right after I took them, it didn't look anything like what I was looking at. You just can't capture the scale. Yeah, the scale, I guess, you just can't capture. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, amazing. And how high do you get? Because that's always an issue for me, as you probably know on the show. I just can't do elevation. I seem to remember in the Wikipedia it said about nearly 9,000 feet, which is almost at my limit, I think.
Yeah, most of the hike runs between 6,000 and 9,000 feet.
All right. How did you feel?
I honestly didn't notice it at all.
Right.
I didn't notice it at all. I trained my face off after the previous year on the Appalachian Trail for 5 days. I realized I was nowhere near the shape I thought I was in. It was incredibly difficult. So I trained like crazy for this. Yeah. And so the uphills didn't bother me at all, even though they were difficult. They were not. I mean, they were difficult. The downhills were tough on my knees, but
yes. How old are you, Steve?
I am 54 now.
Right, nice. That's good age to do it. Lovely age to do it, I think. Anyway,
most days are 3,000 feet up and 3,000 feet down.
Nice. So, what about? Did you? I think I may have alluded to this, but during the day, you may not stop. You didn't get to a refugio. Maybe did you pass through small villages where you could get a bite to eat, or did you have to take your food with you? Logistically, how did you handle it?
Most days, you did not pass by any towns, but you may have come upon another refugio that somebody else was, other people would have stayed at.
Right.
And you could get a bite there. Otherwise, the refugios, you could pay a little extra and they would pack you a lunch for the day.
Nice.
With a sandwich, an apple, that kind of thing. And you take that with you for the day, that and your water.
Yeah, nice. So you said you went in July. So when is the season then? I don't think they get much snow till about October, November time, do they?
Yeah, it really runs mid-June until I believe about mid-September.
Wow,
end of September.
It's quite short then, yeah. And I know you had plans to do the Camino this year. Obviously, with the coronavirus, you can't do that. Is this part of a plan to do much more hiking generally?
It is. I was actually, today's Tuesday the 14th. I was supposed to leave 2 days from now for Spain.
Oh dear.
Yeah, and I was going to hike the Camino by myself, and then my wife and another couple are going to meet me in France, and we're going to travel around France and go to the French Open for a few days, watch a little tennis.
Nice.
And all of that is blown. So now I've got a permit for the John Muir Trail, August 13th. So I'm hoping that the world comes back online, allow me to do that.
Yeah, and I know you want to hike the AT one day. Did going for that section hike of the AT encourage you or not?
It did. I loved it. It was very difficult, but I loved it. I fell in love with it. And so now I ended up last year, I sold my company. Right. And so I do part-time consulting now. And I've got a list very, very long of places I want to hike. And the AT is one of them. Probably maybe 2 years from now, I'll do that. In the meantime, there's an awful lot of 10, 20-day hikes.
Nice.
That I'd like to do.
Where are you going to do them then?
I'd like to do, and I know you've talked about the Highland Way.
Yes.
I'd like to do that one. I'd like to go down to Chile.
I was supposed to be going on that one this month as well.
Really? Down Patagonia?
The West Highland Way. I was supposed to be in Scotland. I was supposed to be doing that this month. And you're going to do the Patagonia Way, are you?
I am. And that's something that, I love your show, listen to it, and I can't wait to do the Appalachian Trail one day. But I think it's something that I was thinking about and listening to it. And I listen to your show while I'm training a lot of times when I'm not doing hikes and things. Yeah. There's an awful lot of tremendous through hikes that are shorter that people can do in a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, things like that, until their life affords them the opportunity to take 5 months.
Yes, I know there are, but I suppose I niched it down a little bit by being the Appalachian Trail. But you know what? I like the idea of including other hikes on here, and people love listening to these other hikes. So I'm glad you've come on the show and talked to us about it. So I really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it. And I love your show. I'm a huge fan, and maybe someday I'll see you out on the trail.
That'd be cool, and enjoy the AT when you get to it, because it is tough. By the way, a thought struck me that Sweat Bucket now has a bucket list, which is somewhat
I do.
A bucket full of sweat. Nice. Okay, well, look, good to talk to you, and we'll talk again sometime.
Thanks, Mighty Blue. Take care.
Take it easy. Bye.
Bye.
Doesn't that sound awesome? And he's going to do the JMT if things open later this year. I think Steve has sorted out his retirement pretty well, don't you? I just want to thank everybody who supported the show with a donation, particularly in recent weeks with the economy tanking and everything that's going on. I appreciate your support more than you'll ever know. And if you do want to show your appreciation, don't forget you can go to the podcast page on mightyblueontheat.com and click on the donate button there. Thank you so much. Finally today, Grandma Gatewood becomes quite the little celebrity on the trail, with reporters marvelling at her every move, while memories of a sad marriage and ultimate escape still circulate through her mind. I'll see you next week. Chapter 8. Attention. July the 16th to the 26th, 1955. The sharp rocks were killing her feet, each step a new jolt of pain. Emma didn't wear the hard-soled boots of a seasoned outdoorsman, but rubber-soled sneakers that quickly wore out. In an emergency, she had taped the discarded rubber heel from a man's shoe to the bottom of her instep for more arch support. Her footwear was more akin to the moccasins worn by Daniel Boone, who was born in the vicinity and used to hunt and fish in these hills as a boy. Happy to let her feet heal, she spent the night at the Hurtline campsite and made it to the narrow little town of Port Clinton, Pennsylvania, the next afternoon. She poked into a store to see about getting a new pair of shoes. The place was a wreck, the worst disorder she'd ever seen. Boxes were piled high and there was a layer of dust on everything she touched. She bought a few snacks and sat on the porch out front for a bit before heading down the street to see about a room at the Kingfish Hotel. Just then, a woman in a nearby house hollered. "Are you the woman who's walking the trail?" she asked. "I am," said Emma. The woman, Mrs. Swayberger, was very excited, and that made Emma happy. The woman told her son to stand next to Emma for a photograph, and the woman's daughter insisted Emma follow her around the corner to meet her husband, who was interested in the trail. She had again been recognized. Word about her hike was spreading like prairie fire. The Associated Press dispatched from Boonesboro, Maryland, and made it all the way to Gallia County, in fact, and the newspaper ran a follow-up story on the local woman who was getting national attention. Her exact whereabouts since she left here early in April to go south were not known until Friday afternoon, when word came from Boonesboro, Maryland, of her progress along the trail which winds from Mount Oglethorpe, Georgia, through 14 states, 8 national forests and 2 national parks, to its northern terminus atop Mount Katahdin, Maine, some 5,200 feet above sea level. The reporter interviewed Monroe, Emma's oldest son, who was the Y chief for Ohio Bell Telephone Company in Gallia County. Monroe seemed surprised, but not worried. "We did not know for sure what she was doing until just yesterday, though we were beginning to have our suspicions," he said. "Mother is a great lover of the outdoors, enjoys perfect health, and can outwalk most persons many years younger." On a stretch of the AT through Berks County, Pennsylvania, Emma bumped into a group of Boy Scouts from the Shikellamy Scout Reservation, who promptly reported back to a colonist at the Reading Eagle. Emma had told the boys that she'd so far detoured for 3 copperheads and 2 rattlesnakes, and that she'd slept outdoors on a handful of freezing nights. The boys were mystified that she was wearing tennis shoes, the columnist reported. She was wearing sneakers, and supposedly expert counsel on hiking comfort advises the wearing of stout shoes of good weight, not too heavy, but tough enough to stand hard wear, the columnist wrote. When you're a 67-year-old woman on a 2,050-mile hike, though, maybe there isn't another person in the world who qualifies as an expert on how to take care of your own feet. News of her walk had even reached a young writer at a fledgling magazine called Sports Illustrated in New York City. Reporter Mary Snow began to wonder whether the eccentric grandmother on the Appalachian Trail might make for a good profile. The newspaper stories had addressed the who, what, where, when, and how, But no reporter had touched on the most important, intriguing question. Why? Snow would. But first things first, how do you track down someone in the wilderness who's hiking at a clip of 14 miles a day? Meanwhile, Emma had her own problems beside her swollen feet. She had left Port Clinton, Pennsylvania, after a good night's rest, enjoyed a lovely walk the next afternoon, bunked in a cabin at Blue Mountain for $1, then headed for Palmerton, Pennsylvania on the morning of July the 19th. She tried to rent a hotel room, but the folks there wouldn't let her stay. She wondered what she must look like. She had found a faucet that morning and washed her face, but without a comb she had no way to brush the knots out of her iron grey hair. She had sifted through a campfire and found a fork, which she used as a comb. Now, though, she was leaving yet another hotel, exhausted and wondering where she would go for the night. She was walking down the road's shoulder when a car pulled up beside her in the dusk. Driving was a young woman from the hotel who appeared burdened by a conscience. She asked Emma to climb in, saying she wanted to take her into Palmerton proper. A few minutes later, they pulled up at a hotel and Emma got a room for the night for $2. She soaked her feet in a bath and walked down the street to Sally's restaurant for a sandwich. Someone there told her she needed to meet Ralph Lay, and the waitress, Sally, got him on the phone. Lay, bespectacled and 70, was retired from New Jersey Zinc Company, and he was quite the hiker himself. Besides climbing Mount Washington, he had spent the spring before helping clear the Appalachian Trail to Devil's Pulpit on the Lehigh Gap. He knew that section of the trail like the back of his hand. Lay invited Emma to stay at his house, so she fetched her bag from the hotel and showed up on his front porch. The two talked into the night, forming a bond that would last for years. Lay called up the newspaper in Allentown and 2 journalists came for yet another interview. The reporter asked her what surprised her most about the hike. "All the publicity the newspapers give me," she said. The next morning, Lay drove her across town to a store called Grant's, which wasn't yet open for the day. Once Lay explained who his company was, the clerk obliged and invited them in, pleased to accommodate. Emma scanned the aisle for a pair of women's shoes that would fit, but the largest size was much too small. Her feet had swollen out of women's shoes. She slipped into a comfortable pair of men's shoes, size 8.5, which gave her a little room should her feet continue to expand. She bought the shoes, 2 pairs of woolen nylon socks and some wire hairpins. The clerk, out of kindness, gave her 3 5-cent packages of lifesavers and wished her lots of luck. Lay drove Emma back to Lehigh Gap, where she had left the trail, and the two climbed the cliff to the top. Lay thought Emma might need help getting up the steep embankment, but he was surprised to see her scale the wall, lugging her bag and maple walking stick without help. He bid her goodbye from below, and again she was alone. Emma wrote to her daughters again on February the 20th, 1938, from her sister Lucy's house in Santa Ana, California, where she had found a job working as a practical nurse. She was burdened deeply by her decision to leave her family and peeved by the repeated attempts from her husband to lure her home. Nevertheless, she was considering returning even then. Dear Louise and Lucy, it is dear of you to write to me and send the nice candy and valentines. I like the pictures you draw and am so glad you are getting along so nicely at school. I hope I can be with you sometime and do all the nice little things I would love to do. I have a lovely place to stay and there is lots of lovely flowers of all kinds. I would tell you more, only your dad would write to the man in the mountains with lots of flowers and such a house, etc., like he did when I was at Orange. I have Sunday off and spend it here with Mother. It is quite a little drive, but it is nice to be with Mother. Don't you think it would be nice to be with your mother? I picked some oranges and made some fruit salad for dinner or lunch, as the city folks say. My side hurts pretty badly sometimes. Some nights I can hardly get to sleep for the pain. I want to have it seen to as soon as I can. It should make your dad feel good to know he did it, throwing me down on the floor. My breast is still blue where he jumped on me, but the lump is gone. I go to bed now and everything is just as peaceful and quiet as can be. Hoping you are fine and be nice girls so I can be proud of you. With loads of love, Mama. The pain in her side was getting worse, and though she was working 6 days a week, she couldn't easily afford to see a doctor. In the days after she mailed the letter, she devised a plan. She'd return home to be with her daughters and PC would have to pay for her medical care, whatever that might entail. The decision would almost kill her. The Delaware Water Gap, with its scenic overlooks and rhododendron tunnels and magnificent waterfalls, was just ahead, and she was walking hard to get there before dark. she was coming down out of an upthrust of rocks on Kittatinny Mountain in a hurry to find a place to stay before night set in, when she slipped. The fall wasn't bad, but she felt a short, sharp pain in her knee. She examined the injury and tested the knee under her full weight. To her relief, the sprain wasn't severe, but even a minor injury on the trail can be devastating, especially when it's exacerbated by continuous pounding. Ahead were the toughest, tallest mountains in New Hampshire and Vermont and Maine, and she'd need to be in top condition. She walked on and found a pool of water and some picnic tables in the dark. Someone had told her there weren't any houses in the vicinity, so she made her bed on one of the tables and tried to find sleep. She didn't know whether she had made a bed at the local makeout spot or what, but at several times during the night, headlights would swing across the bend as cars pulled into the park. And every time, upon catching sight of the worn-out human sprawled on the picnic table, the car spun around and sped away, as if something were chasing them, leaving behind an old woman, half asleep and chuckling. She wasn't on the trail but 5 minutes the morning of July the 22nd when she came to a village, so near to where she'd had a terrible time trying to sleep. Hotels, motels, restaurants, houses. The time was 5:45 a.m, so nothing was open, but she waited around a bit, hoping to grab a bite to eat before she set off again. A couple of men noticed her on the sidewalk and told her the restaurants didn't open until 8 o'clock. She couldn't wait that long, so she set off across the bridge over the Delaware River and into New Jersey, the 8th state she'd walked through in 80 days. She hadn't made it far into New Jersey when a Jeep pulled up beside her and the driver rolled down his window. He was wearing a police uniform. "What's your name?" the man asked. Emma wondered what she had done wrong. She thought, by the way he had said it, that she was in trouble. Maybe he mistook her for a vagrant. "Emma Gatewood," she said. "You wanted on the telephone," the man said. He opened the door on the passenger side and she climbed in and they drove to his office not far away. A Sports Illustrated reporter named Mary Snow wanted Emma to call a collect in New York City. It took her an hour to get through, and the officer poured Emma a glass of milk and gave her a donut while she dialed. When she finally reached Mary Snow, the two chatted for a while, and Snow asked Emma to call her on Monday to let Snow know her location. She asked if she could tag along for a bit and write a profile of the hiking grandmother. Emma didn't see a problem with that. She promised to call. The next day was a bitter disappointment. The trail was difficult. High above the Delaware River Valley on Kittatinny Ridge, she did not make it far on a sprained knee. She slept beside the path 3 miles from Crater Lake. A deer came in the night, snorting, and she was glad it wasn't a bear. She stayed the next night in the High Point Monument, an obelisk built to honour the war dead, and the next in a rest home, of all places, where she had plopped down on the grass out front and waited for the proprietor to invite her in. On July the 26th, she made it to the Appalachian Lodge in Vernon, New Jersey, and found a bed in a shed on an army cot. If she kept the pace, by the next afternoon she'd be in New York, nearing the Hudson River Valley, where she was to meet Mary Snow.